Fortunately, I didn't carry that tradition to the bench of allowing my stenographer to take charge of what I was going to dictate. Dropping, which fortunately, unfortunately, fell straight on his gown. Used this courtroom to escape from clients and solicitors who were trying to chase me. He said, "Look, there are no sirs at the Bombay Bar. You better learn to call me Temthan." Truth or the substance of a matter lies in what relief we grant to the client, whether it's judges or what relief you seek as a lawyer. It was not just about writing judgments, but bringing about true justice to the citizen. The doctor doesn't guarantee the success of the treatment of a patient. How can a lawyer guarantee a result? No way anybody could browbeat the judge against me. The court was completely against me.
To kindly address the candidate. Ladies and gentlemen, Justice Chakra.
Thank you very much, Deepa. Chief Justice Devendra Upadhyay, Chief Justice of the High Court of Judicature at Bombay, the judges of the Bombay High Court, including the 5 newly sworn-in judges. You could actually form a constitution bench, as we call it in the Supreme Court. Congratulations to all of you. The Advocate General, Dr. Biren Saraf, President of the Bombay Bar Association, Shri Natin Thakkar, President of the Advocates Association of Western India, Mr. Prashant Radekar, but not the least, my best friend, critic, but above all, my fierce protector, my own spouse, Kalpana. I decided not to speak from a prepared text. My secretary and my law clerks reminded me yesterday that I have to speak this evening, and have I prepared something. Partly due to the pressure of work, we were working on Constitution bench judgments which I have to deliver before my term comes to an end. But above all, it's not just the pressure of work. I was wondering how I sum up 40 years of a judicial career, something which struck me, where do I begin? But then as I sat here, I'm sure you saw me writing furiously, the memories all just started flooding into my mind, just sitting here and observing the beauty of this courtroom and the warmth of your friendship and affection. Today is very different for me. Today is a moment of thanksgiving. It's a moment of reflection, but it's also a moment of remembrance. Thanksgiving because I owe everything to this institution. Farzana began by saying that the stenographer whom she met told her how flawlessly I would dictate plaints or petitions in suits or writ petitions. The reason why everybody felt we dictated flawlessly was about midway through the argument, midway through the dictation, Aziz would just put up his hand and say, "I'll now do the rest for you." Fortunately, I didn't carry that tradition to the bench of allowing my stenographer to take charge of what I was going to dictate. In this court, the young lawyer, or not so young lawyer, was arguing before Justice Variava. We didn't have the air conditioning in those days. There were no nets to keep the pigeons away, and there would be a constant flurry of pigeons entering this courtroom. As it so happened, when he was arguing before Justice Variava, there was a pigeon dropping, which fortunately, unfortunately, fell straight on his gown. Now, there are several communities in the country, as you know, who believe that if there's a pigeon dropping or a dropping of a bird, that's a sign of auspiciousness. So a lawyer would be prone to believe that, well, that's going to result in an order in their favor. And then he says, looks at Justice Variava and says, "My lords, the peacocks have become very mischievous." I used this courtroom to escape from clients and solicitors who were trying to chase me. Because one of the secrets which I had developed as a young lawyer was to go into a court where I was no work at all, because nobody would track you down in that court. And I would sit in the last row and read my cases which were likely to come up that day or the next day. And I must share a secret with you. When I joined the Bombay Bar, the bar of our High Court, I joined the chambers of Mr. Temtan and Deharujana, a fearless lawyer, an erudite lawyer, a scholarly lawyer. We were a small chamber. He would carry his own satchel to his car, never relied on a peon to carry his briefs. I walked into his chamber and said, "Good morning, sir." And he said, "Look, there are no sirs at the Bombay Bar. You better learn to call me Temtan." And Justice Painse, for the simple reason that I mentioned, that if you walked by his courtroom after lunch and he had just assembled, you could be sure that it was 2 o'clock in the afternoon. His sense of professionalism, he was always ready with all the briefs that came up before him. The ability to formulate minutes of the order, that taught us how to frame reliefs. Because very often, the truth or the substance of a matter lies in what relief we grant to the client, whether as judges or what relief you seek as a lawyer. Too often a good case can be lost just because the inability of a lawyer or the judge to formulate the relief which has to be granted. But Justice Painse, he was very brief, sometimes even curt. He couldn't stand up to fools. And I got the wrong end of the stick on a large number of occasions from him. Looking back in reflection, I realized the importance of what the judge did. Because he did believe that his role was not just about writing judgments, but bringing about true justice to the citizen, which he did sometimes by persuasion, a lot of times through the weight of personality which a judge commands, sometimes with a little bit of stick. But it tended to work. We had judges like Justice Lenton, fearless, sat in the tunnel court, as we called it, court number 37 on the first floor. Justice V.P. Tipnis, Justice Viju Tipnis. He had the ability, even if he was holding against you as a lawyer, he would have the ability to formulate what you had argued and lift it to a different level. So the great reward of appearing before Justice Tipnis was not the fact that you had won or lost, because that's subsidiary. Just as a doctor doesn't guarantee the success of the treatment of a patient, how can a lawyer guarantee a result? Because contingency fees anyway are illegal in India. But what he would do is that if you argued a point, he would lift your argument and place it at a level or pedestal which even you had not done. That was also a training to the lawyer of what I could have argued, but which I didn't. I argued perhaps at a much lower plane, but here was a judge who could lift what I argued into a different plane. So it was a training ground for those like me who became judges, but it was also a training ground for us as lawyers to understand how an argument, by a simple reconceptualization, can be lifted from the mundane to the sublime. By judicial office here and then in the Supreme Court, not exactly the first in the Supreme Court, but a distinguished judge, grace personified, but grace combined with a strength of character and ability to stand up to anybody. There was no way anybody could browbeat the judge. On a day like this, just before Diwali, it must have been 1995 or 1996, he called us to the chamber. They were dead against me. The court was completely against me. And he said, Dr. Chandrachud, would you like to take your chance before another bench after Diwali? So we will not take up this matter. We'll release the matter. You can take your chance before someone else, perhaps? And I knew they were against me. And much to the consternation of Mr. Popat from Mullah and Mullah, who was briefing me in that case, I said, "My lords, I'm quite conscious of the fact that you are completely against me. But I'm more than satisfied that you have understood every point that you have argued, and I have nothing further to argue in this case. So please, you can reserve judgment, and I know that I'm not likely to succeed, but that's where the balance of justice in your eyes lies, and I accept it. But I don't want to avoid the court and go to another bench today." So they said, "But we are really tired. This is a long term, and I think we're not really keen now. We want to leave the court." So I bowed to him and I left the chamber. Next term, we succeeded hands down before another bench. Which really also tells you that there is some astrological element in the outcomes of cases as well. Lawyers, my own senior, Mr. Andhyarujana, ramrod straight, as someone once told me when I joined his chamber, a no-nonsense lawyer. When we used to travel to Goa, and you had all these beautiful resorts which had come up in Goa, he insisted that we'll never spend the client's money staying in a fancy resort. He would always insist on staying at the Mandui, which was near the High Court in those days, because he said you shouldn't spend unnecessary money for the clients, and you're so close to the court. We'd sit together till late hours every evening, working out cases. Mr. Sirvai, I had the good fortune of observing Mr. Sirvai in this court in his fading years. The brilliance was still there, the passion, the commitment to the cause of justice was there. I remember arguing the challenge to the validity of the Public Premises Eviction of Unauthorized Occupants Act, when he argued sitting down before a bench of Justice Bharucha and Justice Sri Krishna. Again, I was the last counsel to argue. And I pointed out something which was a new judgment which was dead against us. And Mr. Sirvai then got up and said, "My lords, this is in the best tradition of our bar. This young junior has cited a judgment which no one wanted to cite. And I was going to begin with this judgment. And I must compliment this junior." There was once a case where I was appearing before Chief Justice Chittatosh Mukherjee. We were serial number 1 on board when Mr. Sirvai called our chamber at 10:15 in the morning. When Homi Sirvai called, my senior picked up the phone and he was explaining to him what he was writing in the latest edition of the Constitutional Law of India on the judgment in Bachchan Singh, the death penalty case. This conversation went on from 10:15 to about 10 to 11. And my senior thought that, he was serial number, he was in the court and I was actually in Justice Chittatosh Mukherjee's court for some small matter. So my senior handed over the phone to me and said to Mr. Sirvai, "I'll give you somebody who is the son of the author of the judgment in Bachchan Singh. So you better continue this conversation." Well, the conversation got over somewhere around 11:30. When my case was called out, Justice Chittatosh Mukherjee said, "Well, this junior doesn't have the courtesy of appearing." Judges in those days were very were very tough about passing over matters or keeping back matters, as we call it here. So my senior got up and said, "Well, please forgive my junior because he's in a conversation with Mr. Sirvai, which I had passed on to him." Mr. Nani Palkhiwala was in this court. He would never carry his own gown, and he would typically borrow a gown from one of the juniors. One of the greats of the bar who always forgot his gown in Bombay House, always took a gown from someone else, even if it was a young member of the bar, and always wore a gown, may not have been a senior's gown. That was the great tradition. I mean, look at the leveler that he was. Mr. V.R. Manohar again came from Nagpur and practiced here as the advocate general.